I would just like to touch on very briefly some of the questions and comments that were made in regard to education in Ghana. It was a cornerstone of the Nkhrumah government, even prior to independence, because what happened was that in 1950, there was, after the formation of the CPP, there was what Nkhrumah called a positive action campaign, which was a general strike inside the country, which led to Nkhrumah and some of his other comrades being arrested, and they were put in prison in Ghana, in the Gold Coast at that time. But at the same time, the people who were outside continued to organize, and they utilized even the British Reform Constitution. They entered into local elections, and in 1951 there was a nationwide election, which the CPP came out with the largest block of votes. And when the British saw that, they released Nkhrumah from prison after spending a year there, and they made him what they call leader of government business, which was like a transitional government that was there between 1951 and 1957. But even beginning at that period, there was a strong emphasis on education. And as the sister mentioned, Ghana had a tremendous foreign reserve based upon its export of cocoa. Much of this money was reinvested in the development of educational institutions inside the country, also industrial projects inside the country, as well as roads and other types of technological advancements in Ghana. In fact, there were tremendous advances made in this regard. 3 universities were formed during that period. University of Ghana at Legon, the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, and also the Cape Coast University were formed under Nkrumah's leadership. Primary school education became almost universal inside the country. The ideological education was very important. They set up a ideological school at Winneba that brought in Marxist instructors from Africa as well as the Soviet Union and other parts of the world. And they actually trained freedom fighters from other parts of Africa, people like Sam Nujoma, Robert Mugabe of Sam Nujoma of Namibia, who led SWAPO eventually, Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe, who was in Ghana, who studied at Winneba, and in fact his first wife was a Ghanaian woman, and other forces too. Then of course, perhaps the major project, well, I just want to mention also that he gave a lot of scholarships to people from other parts of Africa, from the Gambia, from Nigeria, South Africa, tremendous amount of scholarships. Also, African Americans was a pretty much open door policy to African Americans in Ghana. W.B. Du Bois was brought there. He died there to work on the Encyclopedia Africana. His wife, Shirley Graham Du Bois, who was a scholar and theoretician in her own right, after Du Bois' death in 1963, she was appointed as director of Ghana National Television. It's a very powerful position in Ghana and throughout Africa itself. And she had very close ties with China and also Japan. Sony Corporation, in fact, provided a tremendous amount of technology for the development of the national television network in Ghana. Ghana was a very advanced country at that time period. Also, I wanted to mention that there was a lot of scholarships given to African students from other parts of Africa. The Sino-Soviet split in relationship to Ghana. Nkhrumah was one of the co-founders of the non-aligned movement, along with Nehru of India, Nasser of Egypt, Suharto of Indonesia, as well as Tito of Yugoslavia. And they attempted to work both with the Soviet Union and China. Nkhrumah visited China, and I know in 1962, and he had very good relations with China as well as the Soviet Union. Also, somebody mentioned the Servicemen's March in 1948, very important in sparking a nationwide rebellion that landed Nkhrumah and other of his comrades in the UGCC in prison. And the last 2 things, of course, were the books. I mentioned the Ghana Evening News, fantastic newspaper. It's still preserved through microfilm at some of the universities. You can go back and read it They have articles by people from all over the world who wrote from a revolutionary perspective. And also, since the coup in 1966, now I think it's important to recognize the class forces that were involved in the coup. It was not the leadership of the army that carried out the coup. It was some lower-ranking junior officers along with the police, because the police were under investigation for corruption in Ghana. It was the CIA and the State Department were able to influence these elements to overthrow the top leadership in the military as well as the party. So I think that's very important to understand as well. Since Ghana, the coup in Ghana, it's been, the country has been virtually in a state of stagnation for the last 4.5 decades. There have been periods of progress. There have been upheavals since that time period. But today we have one of the more progressive parties that are in power. John Atta Mills is the president of the country, but it still has never returned to the era of Nkhrumah. Also, I wanted to mention lastly the Volta River project, the dam. It was an idea initially had been advanced by the British, but it was taken up by Nkhrumah. He really pushed this project. The British reneged on it. Eventually, he had gone to the Soviet Union and asked them to assist. And when they looked like they were going to, the U.S. stepped in. Kaiser Aluminum agreed to provide a lot of the technical assistance for building of the dam, but the idea was to accelerate electricity and power development in Ghana, but also to neighboring countries in West Africa. Interestingly enough, the dam opened on February the 1st, 1966, and Nkhrumah was overthrown 3 weeks after the dam was opened. So you can see what a potential threat the imperialists thought that this project represented for Ghana and for Kwame Nkrumah. You can basically divide his rule into, in general terms, 3 different periods. You had the period of transition, of course, between 1947 when he returned all the way up to 57. Then the period between 1957 and 1960, the first years of independence, had somewhat of a Western orientation in regard to the economy. Also, after 1960 and 1961, there was a sharp turn towards the left, more closely alignment with the Soviet Union and China. They came out specifically saying that they wanted to build socialism in Ghana and socialism throughout the continent of Africa. And this is what the ideology of Nkhrumah, that's why it proved so dangerous to imperialism, because he wanted to build socialism not just in Ghana, but he recognized that Ghana as a socialist state, if they were able to build socialism, and there were tremendous impediments to it, because not only did he have opposition from the more moderate and right-wing elements outside the CPP, there was opposition also within the party itself. People who were in favor of the national independence struggle, but were not down for the construction of socialism. So this was a major problem. So what he did, he emphasized heavily building a cadre among the youth. They had the Young Pioneer Movement. They built all these schools, and they brought people in from other parts of Africa also to help build the kind of cadre that they needed to build socialism inside of Ghana itself. So I just wanted to point that out in conclusion. Thank you again.